11 disgusting golden age actresses you were tricked into liking. What if I told you that some of Hollywood's most beloved golden age actresses were hiding dark secrets that would make your skin crawl? The same women you've admired for their grace, beauty, and talent were allegedly engaging in behavior so disturbing that powerful studio executives worked overtime to bury the truth. Today, we're pulling back the carefully constructed curtain to reveal the shocking reality behind these glamorous facades. And trust me, you'll never look at these classic stars the same way again. In the mid-20th century, Hollywood's studio system was a well-oiled image-making machine. Executives carefully crafted perfect public personas for their leading ladies, often portraying them as paragons of beauty, grace, and morality. Behind closed doors, however, many of these actresses lived turbulent, sometimes disturbing lives that would never make it into the fan magazines. Publicists and press agents worked tirelessly to bury scandals, silencing victims, destroying evidence, and planting flattering stories to keep stars marketable. This relentless control not only protected the actresses' reputations, but also ensured the studio's financial dominance, creating an illusion so convincing that audiences believed it for decades. 1. Joan Crawford.
Oh, no, it hasn't gone far enough. You've been telling me what's wrong with me, now I'm gonna tell you what's wrong with you.
Joan Crawford was the very definition of a Hollywood success story, rising from a difficult, impoverished childhood to become one of the most glamorous and bankable stars of her era. With her striking looks, relentless ambition, and a fierce work ethic, Crawford built an image that audiences adored, the self-made woman who could overcome anything. By the 1940s, she had become not just a screen legend, but also a public figure celebrated for her seemingly perfect life, including her role as a devoted mother to her 4 adopted children. But behind the satin gowns and million-dollar smile, a much darker reality reportedly existed. According to her eldest daughter, Christina Crawford, Joan's private life was marked by volatility, cruelty, and abuse. Christina's memoir, Mommy Dearest, painted a chilling picture, describing incidents of physical violence, severe emotional manipulation, and obsessive control over even the smallest details of her children's lives. Punishments could be extreme, sometimes for the most minor infractions, and her temper was said to erupt without warning. Crawford was known for her almost obsessive need for cleanliness and order, traits that the studio publicity teams spun into charming quirks of a disciplined, glamorous star. In interviews, she was portrayed as a strict but loving mother, a woman determined to raise her children with the same values that had led to her own success. What the public didn't see were the alleged violent outbursts, nights where her anger boiled over, or moments where her children were reportedly left terrified in their own home. The studios had a vested interest in keeping Joan's image spotless. In an era when a single scandal could destroy a career, MGM and later Warner Brothers worked to bury any whisper of trouble. Publicists ensured that Crawford's charity work, her meticulous appearance, and her Hollywood friendships dominated headlines, even after the publication of Mommy Dearest. Many in the industry rushed to defend her, dismissing Christina's account as exaggerated or vindictive, further demonstrating how deeply Hollywood protected its own. Whether or not every allegation was accurate, what remains clear is that Joan Crawford's public persona and her private life were worlds apart. She became a living example of how the Golden Age machine could rewrite reality, turning a troubled, often feared woman into America's glamorous, disciplined sweetheart. It's a reminder that in old Hollywood, the truth was rarely what the cameras showed. 2. Shirley Temple.
You stood here and told me like you were proud of it. Well, you better stay away from me until you change your ideas, Mr. Albert.
Shirley Temple was the child star who saved Hollywood during the Great Depression. An angel-faced, curly-haired symbol of innocence whose films brought hope to millions when the world seemed darkest. Studios marketed her as the perfect little girl, cheerful, wholesome, and untouched by the ugliness of the adult world. But in truth, Shirley was a working child in one of the most exploitative industries imaginable, subject to grueling filming schedules, manipulative contracts, and the ever-present risk of predatory behavior from those in power. Shirley herself later acknowledged that she was exposed to deeply inappropriate situations at a young age. She recounted an early audition where a producer exposed himself to her, a moment she brushed off as a naive child, but which today stands as a clear example of Hollywood's long history of abusing and sexualizing minors. Despite experiencing exploitation firsthand, Shirley would grow up to become one of the system's most loyal defenders. As an adult, she transitioned from film into politics and public service, cultivating an image of dignity and respectability. But part of that respectability came at a cost. Shirley reportedly downplayed or outright dismissed accusations against Hollywood figures accused of abuse, even those accused of harming children. She praised the industry for the opportunities it gave her, rarely speaking critically about its darker side. By publicly supporting known abusers and maintaining the narrative of a magical Hollywood, Shirley helped preserve the same structures that had exploited her. It's important to understand the cultural weight her endorsement carried. This was America's most beloved child star. If Shirley Temple said Hollywood was good, millions were inclined to believe it. Her words weren't just personal opinion. They were powerful propaganda for an industry desperate to protect its golden image. Whether her stance came from loyalty, denial, or survival, the result was the same. The machinery of exploitation kept turning, shielded by the smiling face of a woman who had once been its most famous victim. Shirley Temple's story is one of profound contradictions. A girl celebrated for her innocence, who endured the loss of it far too soon. And later, a woman who stood by the very system that took it from her. It's a chilling example of how deep Hollywood's conditioning could run, and how even its victims could become its protectors. 3. Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr is often remembered as Hollywood's most beautiful woman, a screen siren whose face inspired characters from comic books to wartime propaganda. But Hedy wasn't just a beauty. She was also a brilliant inventor whose ideas contributed to the technology that would one day make Wi-Fi and GPS possible. This genius and glamour narrative became her legacy, an irresistible story that the media loved, a woman who was both brains and beauty. The perfect rebuttal to the stereotype of the shallow starlet. But behind the carefully polished legend was a far more complicated reality, one that the public rarely saw. Hedy's life was punctuated by repeated legal troubles, including multiple arrests for shoplifting. While these incidents were often spun by the press as misunderstandings or the result of eccentric behavior, those who knew her claimed they were part of a larger pattern of erratic decision-making. She was also known for her explosive temper, which could erupt without warning. Former staff members described her as unpredictable and at times verbally abusive. Some fans who approached her in public recalled being humiliated or aggressively dismissed, even as the studios continued to portray her as a gracious and charming public figure. Publicists worked overtime to frame these incidents as the quirks of a passionate, misunderstood genius, someone too extraordinary to be bound by ordinary rules of behavior. Hedy's volatility was often masked by her intelligence and beauty, allowing her to escape the kind of public condemnation that might have destroyed other stars. The industry had a vested interest in protecting her image, not only because she was a box office draw, but because she was a symbol. Admitting the truth about Hedy would have meant dismantling a rare and marketable narrative. The glamorous, scandal-free beauty who also happened to be In reality, Hedy Lamarr's story is less about the myth of the beautiful genius and more about the power of Hollywood to rewrite its own history. The public adored her inventions and her elegance, but few knew the human cost of living inside that myth, both for Hedy herself and for the people who crossed her in private. It's a reminder that in Hollywood, brilliance and beauty could hide as much as they revealed, and that the truth was often far messier than the legend. 4. Tallulah Bankhead.
Dying together is even more personal than living together.
Tallulah Bankhead was the kind of star Hollywood loved to label a free spirit. With her sharp wit, husky voice, and unapologetic appetite for pleasure, she was painted as a bold, fearless woman who refused to play by society's rules. Studio publicity leaned heavily into this persona, portraying her as the ultimate bohemian, someone too vibrant, too full of life to ever be tied down by convention. Fans adored the idea of Tallulah as a charming troublemaker who turned every gathering into an event. But behind the playful image was a far darker reality. Tallulah's wild streak often crossed into cruelty. Accounts from colleagues and acquaintances describe her unleashing vicious, racially charged insults that could silence a room. These weren't the harmless eccentricities. Her tantrums were legendary on stage and on set. If she felt slighted or believed a co-star was stealing her spotlight, she didn't just compete, she sabotaged. Props would mysteriously go missing. Lines would be delivered in ways designed to undercut another actor's performance. And scenes were sometimes disrupted just to force reshoots that put her back in control. These tactics were rarely acknowledged publicly. Instead, gossip columnists reframed them as signs of her fiery personality or her commitment to artistic integrity. The reality was that Tallulah thrived in a system that rewarded spectacle over accountability. Her ability to charm powerful friends and intimidate rivals meant her most destructive behaviors were excused or even applauded. The free-spirited rebel image was perfect for the times. It let audiences believe they were seeing a woman living life on her own terms, when in truth, they were witnessing someone who weaponized her charisma to avoid consequences. Tallulah Bankhead's story shows how easily Hollywood could repackage abuse as entertainment. The same industry that sold her as a bold, unconventional heroine was also responsible for shielding her from the fallout of her own actions, ensuring the legend stayed intact long after the damage was done. 5. Bette Davis.
Please don't play governess, Karen. I haven't your unyielding good taste.
Bette Davis is often remembered as the very definition of strength in classic Hollywood, a fierce, uncompromising actress who demanded respect in a male-dominated industry. She was hailed as a feminist trailblazer, someone who refused to be pushed around by studio bosses or romantic co-stars. Her sharp wit and cutting gaze became iconic, and her public image was that of a woman who fought not just for herself, but for all women trying to make their mark in Hollywood. But away from the polished tributes and magazine profiles, a more complicated and unsettling picture emerges. Davis was frequently accused by colleagues, especially other women, of using her influence to undermine female co-stars she saw as threats. On set, she could be ruthlessly competitive, sometimes insisting on wardrobe changes that made her appear more flattering than her scene partners, or demanding camera angles that placed her in the best light while diminishing others. These were not random artistic choices. They were calculated moves to secure her dominance in every frame. Some accounts go further, alleging that Davis actively worked to destroy rivals' careers. This could involve quiet conversations with producers to label a competitor difficult to work with, knowing that such a reputation could end an actress's career overnight in the tightly controlled studio system. Rumors circulated of roles being taken from up-and-coming talents after Davis expressed concerns about their suitability. Concerns that often coincidentally protected her own standing as Hollywood's reigning dramatic star. The hypocrisy of this behavior was stark. While publicly advocating for women to take on more substantial roles and resist being reduced to mere decoration, She was, according to her critics, privately dismantling the opportunities of other women. And yet, in a twisted way, this ruthless streak may have been part of why she survived in an industry that was, at its core, cutthroat and unforgiving. Hollywood's publicity machine played its part in maintaining the myth. Any whispers about Davis's more manipulative tendencies were reframed as evidence of her perfectionism or her dedication to the craft. The narrative was that she demanded the best from everyone, when in truth, some of her demands were designed to keep herself untouchable. Today, Bette Davis's image as a feminist icon remains intact for most audiences, but the deeper history reveals a woman who could be just as complicit in perpetuating Hollywood's toxic power games as the men she famously challenged. Her story is a reminder that public personas, especially ones built on ideals like solidarity and empowerment, can mask a far more self-serving reality when the cameras aren't rolling. 6. Greta Garbo.
Wonderful, if one could believe it. To the loveliest story I ever heard.
Greta Garbo's carefully cultivated image as the mysterious, reclusive screen goddess became one of Hollywood's most enduring myths. She was the woman who wanted to be alone, a figure of elegance and detachment, who seemed almost above the chaos of celebrity life. Fans imagined her retreating into a private world of quiet sophistication, untouched by the petty scandals and interpersonal dramas that consumed so many other stars. This cultivated mystique made her an icon not only of beauty, but of independence and self-possession. Yet behind the heavy curtains of her guarded personal life, a much harsher reality was whispered about by those who worked closest to her. Former household staff and acquaintances described an atmosphere of fear in Garbo's home. The actress was said to have a sharp and cutting tongue, with a tendency to humiliate staff over the smallest perceived mistakes. These weren't isolated moments of impatience. They were, according to multiple accounts, part of a pattern of belittling behavior that could leave employees emotionally shaken. One recurring story paints a vivid picture. Garbo, displeased with how a simple task like setting a table or preparing her tea was handled, would unleash biting criticisms that felt less like corrections and more like personal attacks. Some claimed she used her intelligence and quick wit not as tools for charm, but as weapons to make others feel small. For staff members, working in Garbo's home wasn't the dream job fans might imagine. It could be a tense, unforgiving environment where one wrong move might lead to a public dressing down in front of others. The irony is that Garbo's public image thrived precisely because of her distance from the world. By keeping herself shrouded in mystery, she denied outsiders the opportunity to see the less glamorous side of her personality. The Hollywood publicity machine framed her reclusiveness as a sign of dignity and refinement, conveniently avoiding the reality that part of that isolation may have been fueled by strained personal relationships and a temperament ill-suited to constant company. Even decades after her retirement, the legend of Greta Garbo as the ultimate enigma persists. But for those who bore the brunt of her private temper, the woman behind the myth was far from serene. Her story serves as another reminder that the distance between Hollywood's dream and its reality can be vast, and sometimes the silence hides more than just mystery. 7. Jean Harlow.
Sure I can act. Would you like me to give you a recitation?
Go ahead.
Skip it. My next act will be an impersonation of a young lady going home on the thumb.
In that outfit?
How about your own outfit?
I mean, haven't you got a car?
No, have you?
Jean Harlow's public image as Hollywood's first blonde bombshell was all shimmering gowns, sparkling wit, and comedic charm. She seemed approachable and playful, someone audiences could adore without fear. But behind this carefully constructed facade was a woman accused of ruthless ambition. Insiders claimed Harlow actively worked to sabotage actresses she saw as competition, sometimes by quietly influencing casting decisions. Other times by planting doubts about a rival's talent or professionalism. These actions were invisible to the public. Yet within the industry, they were well-known tactics, the kind that could quietly end a career. And she was hardly alone in concealing troubling behavior. Veronica Lake, for example, remains an enduring style icon, her famous peekaboo hairstyle becoming one of the most imitated looks of the 1940s. But away from the camera, accounts from acquaintances described a very different woman, someone prone to violent outbursts, especially when alcohol was involved. These incidents sometimes turned physical, leaving those around her wary, even as the studio maintained her image as the playful, mysterious starlet. Zsa Zsa Gabor's charm and quick wit made her a media darling, a fixture on talk shows, and a self-styled celebrity aristocrat. Yet behind closed doors, ex-partners and former associates accused her of emotional abuse and financial exploitation. Her charisma could be a powerful tool, making it easy to manipulate or pressure those in her orbit. Behavior the public dismissed as mere eccentricity, but which some saw as calculated and harmful. Joan Fontaine's infamous feud with her sister, Olivia de Havilland, was one of Hollywood's longest-running sibling dramas, often portrayed as nothing more than petty rivalry. But accounts suggest Fontaine's behavior went far beyond harmless bickering. Allegedly, she actively sought to undermine Olivia's career, spreading rumors, creating friction with producers, and attempting to block her sister from landing certain roles. This wasn't simply a family dispute. It was a strategic and sustained campaign that blurred the line between personal vendetta and professional sabotage. Then there's Marlene Dietrich, an actress and style icon, celebrated for her fearless defiance of traditional gender roles. Her magnetic charm and unapologetic sensuality made her a symbol of liberation for many. Yet several women later accused her of predatory behavior, claiming she used her influence to pressure younger women into intimate relationships. For some, she was a trailblazer who shattered societal expectations. For others, she was an abuser who mirrored the very power imbalances she appeared to reject. These accounts, spanning violence, manipulation, exploitation, and sabotage, show that the darkness of Hollywood's golden age was not confined to a handful of bad actors. Instead, it was embedded in a culture where the gap between public image and private reality was vast, and where the studios worked tirelessly to ensure audiences saw only the fantasy, never the truth. 8. Zsa Zsa Gabor.
J'étais pas si peu, j'étais ici 2 ans à l'école. C'était pendant la guerre et enfin, moi je parle beaucoup français. J'ai fait les films à Paris. J'ai fait un film avec Fernandel, j'ai fait un film avec Daniel Gélan, je fais des films à Londres, je fais des films en Allemagne, en allemand, et je fais les films naturellement en Amérique tout le temps.
Zsa Zsa Gabor was a walking headline. With her thick Hungarian accent, glittering gowns, and a talent for turning every interview into a performance, she built a public image of wealth, charm, and wit that made her irresistible to the media. She wasn't just a Hollywood actress, she was a brand, a living advertisement for the glamorous life everyone else could only dream of. But behind the diamonds and dramatic one-liners was a woman accused of far more troubling behavior, and much of it was carefully kept from public view. Her love life was legendary. 9 marriages, each one accompanied by lavish gifts, luxury trips, and plenty of tabloid attention. But ex-husbands and former companions claimed that Gabor's relationships were often less about romance and more about strategic gain. They alleged that she could be emotionally manipulative, charming someone just long enough to secure financial advantages, expensive property, or social connections that would keep her in the spotlight. And then there were the accusations of financial exploitation. Several people close to her claimed she had a habit of borrowing large sums of money and never paying them back. Sometimes, these alleged loans were dressed up as investments, promises of business ventures that never materialized. Others describe situations where she pressured wealthy acquaintances into deals that disproportionately benefited her. It wasn't always about the cash either. Sometimes it was about maintaining influence and ensuring she stayed at the center of the social circle. Former staff members painted a picture of a boss who could be unpredictably temperamental. While she could be dazzlingly generous one day, she might turn cold and cutting the next. Verbal outbursts, public humiliations, and sudden dismissals were reportedly not uncommon. But when these stories surfaced, they were often brushed off as eccentricities of a glamorous star, part of her larger-than-life charm. The truth is, Zsa Zsa Gabor was a master at controlling her own narrative. She understood how to play the media, how to craft a scandal just outrageous enough to keep her name on magazine covers without crossing the line into real reputational damage. The studios loved it too. Every headline was free publicity, and every outrageous quote was a reminder that Zsa Zsa was never boring, even when she faced legal trouble, like her infamous altercation with a police officer in 1989, where she slapped him during a traffic stop. It somehow added to her myth. To her fans, she was the fiery, untamable socialite who refused to be told what to do. But to those who experienced her off camera, the reality was far less charming. A woman who could wield her charisma like a weapon, using it to manipulate, control, and protect her own interests at all costs. In the end, Zsa Zsa Gabor's greatest performance may not have been in front of a camera at all. It was the decades-long role she played as the glamorous, harmless diva, hiding the sharp edges of a personality that was far more complicated and far more ruthless than the public was ever meant to see. 9. Joan Fontaine. Joan Fontaine is remembered as one of Hollywood's great classic leading ladies, graceful, poised, and a master of subtle, emotionally charged performances. She won an Academy Award for Suspicion in 1941 and left audiences spellbound with her elegance. But to those who knew her personally, Fontaine was far from the timid, innocent characters she often played on screen. Her real-life persona was marked by intense competitiveness, personal vendettas, and a long-standing feud that became one of Hollywood's most infamous rivalries. At the center of that feud was her sister, Olivia de Havilland, another major star of the Golden Age. The two were often pitted against each other by the media and allegedly by the studios themselves, who recognized that sibling tension made for good publicity. But behind the headlines, their animosity was deeply personal. Fontaine herself admitted in interviews that she took pleasure in outmaneuvering her sister socially and professionally, describing their relationship as a constant battle for dominance. Industry insiders claimed that Fontaine sometimes used her influence to interfere with her sister's opportunities. This reportedly included lobbying against Olivia for certain roles, subtly undermining her reputation with producers, and taking advantage of moments when her sister was vulnerable. In some accounts, she even manipulated press coverage to paint herself as the more refined and respectable sibling, while casting Olivia in a less favorable light. Her competitive streak didn't stop with family. Colleagues described her as calculating, someone who could be warm and friendly when it suited her, but cold and dismissive when it didn't. Fontaine was known to be fiercely protective of her image and was allegedly quick to turn against anyone she felt was a threat to her career. On set, her perfectionism could slip into control, criticizing co-stars' performances or clashing with directors when she didn't get her way. Despite these tensions, Fontaine had a remarkable ability to maintain her public charm. In interviews, she came across as witty, cultured, and sophisticated, a woman who valued class and decorum. The press loved her, and she knew how to give them just enough intrigue to keep them coming back without revealing too much. Any whispers of her manipulative behavior or strained relationships were easily dismissed as mere gossip. One of her most telling public moments came during the 1943 Academy Awards, when she won Best Actress, beating her sister, who was also nominated that year. As Fontaine walked to the stage, Olivia allegedly extended her hand to congratulate her, but Fontaine brushed past without acknowledgement. That moment, captured on camera, became a lasting symbol of their bitter relationship. In private, Joan Fontaine could be relentless when she felt wronged. Friends and associates recalled that she held grudges for decades, and reconciliation was rarely on the table. Her determination, which made her so successful in the cutthroat world of Hollywood, also fueled the conflicts that defined much of her personal life. By the time of her death in 2013, the rivalry between Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland had become part of Hollywood legend, a story of sibling rivalry magnified by fame, ambition, and the glare of the spotlight. And while Fontaine will always be celebrated for her talent and beauty, her legacy also carries the shadow of a woman who could wield charm and cruelty in equal measure, depending on which served her best in the moment.